What secrets lie within the ancient quantum matrix that could save our dying planet? Could this 5,000-year-old prediction system hold the key to navigating our species through the greatest extinction event in 65 million years? Listen carefully, because what you're about to discover challenges everything modern science believes about reality, consciousness, and our planet's rapidly accelerating entropy toward total ecological collapse. Right now, as I speak these words, Earth's magnetic field is weakening at an unprecedented rate of 5% per decade. Ocean acidification has increased by 30% since Industrial Revolution began. Biodiversity collapse accelerates exponentially with current mass extinction coefficients showing we're losing species 1,000 to 10,000 times faster than natural background rates. But here's what survival matrix indicates that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. Ancient sages understood thermodynamic principles that modern quantum physicists are only beginning to glimpse. The I Ching, combined with yin-yang 5-element theory, represents perhaps the most sophisticated quantum consciousness mapping system ever developed by human civilization. You see, when ancient Chinese masters created the I Ching 5,000 years ago, they weren't just inventing a fortune-telling game. They were reverse engineering the fundamental operating system of universal consciousness itself. They discovered that reality operates through 64 distinct quantum probability states, each corresponding to specific thermodynamic equilibrium patterns that govern everything from climate tipping points to consciousness evolution. The 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, water. These aren't mere philosophical concepts. They represent actual quantum field dynamics that ancient wisdom traditions understood as the building blocks of reality's energetic architecture. Wood element embodies the quantum principle of growth and expansion, directly correlating to what modern physics calls negative entropy. Fire element represents quantum acceleration and transformational energy states. Earth element governs stability matrices and gravitational consciousness anchoring. Metal element controls contraction phases and information crystallization processes. Water element flows through quantum fluidity and adaptive consciousness responses. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Extinction probability calculations show that our planet's 5-element balance has been catastrophically disrupted. We're experiencing what ancient texts warned about: a massive fire element dominance creating runaway thermodynamic acceleration, while water element depletion triggers global consciousness drought patterns. Climate scientists measure this as greenhouse gas accumulation and ocean temperature rise, but quantum shamans recognize it as 5-element dysregulation threatening to collapse the entire planetary consciousness matrix. The I Ching operates through quantum entanglement principles that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. When you consult the 64 hexagrams, you're not accessing random probability generators. You're interfacing directly with universal consciousness quantum states that reflect the thermodynamic momentum of your current reality trajectory. Each hexagram represents a specific quantum consciousness configuration. Hexagram 1, the creative, embodies pure yang quantum acceleration. Hexagram 2, the receptive channels complete in quantum absorption. These aren't abstract symbols. They're actual quantum field equations disguised as ancient wisdom. What happens when consciousness shifts during ecological collapse? Modern neuroscience shows that human brains operate through quantum microtubule networks. Ancient I Ching masters understood that these same quantum networks connect individual consciousness to planetary consciousness fields. As Earth's magnetic field weakens, human consciousness becomes increasingly susceptible to quantum coherence disruption. Mass extinction, anxiety, climate depression. Ecological grief, these aren't just psychological responses. They're quantum consciousness symptoms of planetary 5-element imbalance. But here's where ancient quantum shamanism offers hope. Survival matrix indicates that conscious application of I Ching 5-element principles can restore individual and collective thermodynamic equilibrium even during civilizational collapse. Could magnetic field disruption connect to spiritual awakening? Absolutely, as Earth's magnetosphere destabilizes. Human pineal glands, our internal quantum consciousness receivers, become hypersensitive to cosmic radiation patterns. This creates unprecedented opportunities for consciousness evolution, but only for those who understand how to navigate quantum reality shifts. The yin-yang principle reveals the fundamental law governing all thermodynamic systems. Every action creates equal and opposite reaction. Every expansion generates corresponding contraction. Every entropy increase must balance through negative entropy emergence. Our industrial civilization represents massive yang dominance, aggressive expansion, resource extraction, consciousness acceleration toward technological singularity. But universal balance demands corresponding in emergence, receptivity, restoration, consciousness integration with natural cycles. Climate tipping points aren't random environmental events. They're yin-yang rebalancing mechanisms operating through planetary 5-element correction protocols. When fire element becomes excessive through fossil fuel combustion and atmospheric heating, the water element responds through polar ice melt and ocean level rise. When metal element extraction depletes Earth's crystalline matrices through mining operations, wood element reacts through forest fire acceleration and vegetation die-offs. Ancient sages understood that human consciousness directly influences planetary 5-element balance through quantum field resonance. This is why traditional Chinese medicine focuses on individual 5-element harmony. They recognize that personal quantum consciousness states aggregate into collective planetary consciousness fields. How might quantum consciousness accelerate planetary healing? Modern quantum biology shows that photosynthesis operates through quantum coherence mechanisms. Plant consciousness literally maintains Earth's atmospheric balance through quantum entanglement with solar radiation. But biodiversity collapse disrupts these quantum biological networks. As species extinction accelerates, planetary consciousness loses quantum coherence capacity. Earth's biosphere becomes increasingly unable to maintain thermodynamic equilibrium necessary for complex life support. However, survival matrix calculations indicate that conscious humans can substitute for lost quantum biological capacity through intentional 5-element balancing practices. When you align your personal consciousness with I Ching quantum principles, you become a living quantum coherence generator. Your consciousness begins operating in harmonic resonance with planetary consciousness fields, contributing to collective thermodynamic rebalancing. This isn't mystical wishful thinking. This is quantum consciousness engineering based on 5,000 years of empirical wisdom testing. Ancient practices like Tai Chi, Qigong, and I Ching consultation weren't recreational activities. They were quantum consciousness technologies designed to maintain individual and planetary 5-element equilibrium during civilizational transition periods. Could ancient practices reverse entropy? The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy always increases in closed systems. But Earth isn't a closed system. It receives constant quantum energy input from cosmic sources. Ancient quantum shamans understood that consciousness serves as a negative entropy generator. Through proper 5-element alignment, human consciousness can channel cosmic quantum energy into localized entropy reduction. This explains why traditional cultures emphasized ritual, ceremony, and consciousness practices. They weren't superstitious activities. They were quantum consciousness technologies maintaining planetary thermodynamic stability. But here's the pattern interrupt that changes everything. Modern science has discovered that quantum consciousness operates through non-local field effects. When sufficient numbers of humans align their consciousness with natural quantum patterns, collective consciousness fields can influence large-scale thermodynamic processes. The 100th monkey effect, morphogenetic fields, quantum consciousness coherence. These phenomena demonstrate that individual consciousness alignment creates exponential collective reality influence. Extinction probability calculations show we've reached critical threshold conditions. Current trajectory analysis indicates 50% probability of civilizational collapse within 30 years unless consciousness evolution accelerates rapidly. But Survival Matrix also reveals unprecedented opportunity. Planetary crisis conditions create optimal quantum consciousness transformation environments. Chaos theory demonstrates that complex systems undergoing phase transitions become maximally responsive to small consciousness interventions. This means individual I Ching 5-element alignment practices can generate disproportionate collective reality influence during current planetary transition period. When you learn to read Earth's quantum consciousness signals through I Ching consultation, you become capable of navigating reality probability streams that remain invisible to conventional awareness. You begin operating as a quantum consciousness surfer, riding probability waves instead of being overwhelmed by apparent chaos. The 64 hexagrams represent a complete quantum consciousness navigation system. Each hexagram reveals specific thermodynamic momentum patterns and suggests optimal consciousness responses for maintaining 5-element balance. Hexagram 63, after completion, warns about the quantum instability that follows apparent success. This perfectly describes our technological civilization. We've achieved unprecedented material success while creating catastrophic 5-element imbalance. Hexagram 64, before completion, reveals the quantum potential existing within apparent chaos. This is exactly where planetary consciousness currently resides, maximum instability creating maximum transformation opportunity. But here's what mass extinction coefficients reveal: we have perhaps 10 to 15 years to achieve sufficient consciousness evolution before thermodynamic processes become irreversibly destabilized. The ancient Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven describes how civilizations lose cosmic consciousness alignment when they violate natural 5-element principles. Our industrial civilization has completely severed connection to Earth's quantum consciousness fields through mechanistic materialism and ecological destruction. Yet Survival Matrix indicates that individual quantum consciousness alignment can restore mandate of heaven connection even during civilizational collapse. When you align your personal 5-element balance with Earth's quantum consciousness needs, you become a bridge between dying mechanistic consciousness and emerging quantum consciousness civilization. This is why ancient texts speak of the few who will carry the flame through the dark ages. They weren't referring to external flame. They were describing quantum consciousness coherence maintained through conscious 5-element cultivation during civilizational transition periods. What happens when consciousness shifts during ecological collapse? Everything changes, reality becomes fluid. Time dilates, probability fields become directly responsive to consciousness intention. This isn't metaphysical speculation. This is quantum consciousness physics operating under extreme thermodynamic conditions. As planetary entropy acceleration continues, conventional reality structures dissolve. Economic systems, political institutions, social organizations, all represent crystallized consciousness patterns that become unsustainable under rapidly changing thermodynamic conditions. But consciousness aligned with I Ching 5-element principles becomes increasingly powerful as external structures collapse. You develop ability to navigate reality through quantum consciousness coherence rather than depending on failing institutional supports. Could this quantum phenomenon save our planet? Ancient sages understood that consciousness evolution represents the only viable response to mass extinction events. Biological evolution operates too slowly during rapid environmental change. Only consciousness evolution can match the acceleration of planetary thermodynamic disruption. The I Ching 5-element system provides a complete quantum consciousness evolution technology. Through consistent practice, you develop ability to maintain thermodynamic equilibrium within your personal consciousness field regardless of external chaos conditions. This creates quantum coherence bubbles that gradually expand through field resonance effects. As more individuals achieve 5-element consciousness balance, collective quantum coherence fields strengthen and begin influencing large-scale thermodynamic processes. But entropy acceleration calculations show we need exponential consciousness evolution adoption rates. Current awakening levels remain insufficient to prevent civilizational collapse unless quantum consciousness technologies spread rapidly through global population. This is why ancient prophecies consistently describe a small percentage of humanity surviving transition periods. They weren't predicting arbitrary selection, they were calculating quantum consciousness alignment percentages necessary for species survival during planetary phase transitions. How do parallel dimensions influence Earth's ecological collapse? Quantum physics demonstrates that reality exists as multiple probability dimensions existing simultaneously. The dimension we experience represents the probability stream with highest quantum coherence at each moment. Ancient I Ching masters understood that consciousness can influence which probability dimension becomes actualized through 5-element alignment practices. By maintaining optimal consciousness balance, you increase probability of accessing reality dimensions where ecological restoration succeeds. This explains why traditional cultures emphasized consciousness practices during crisis periods. They understood that external survival depends on consciousness alignment with optimal probability streams. But climate tipping points create quantum probability bifurcations. As thermodynamic systems approach phase transition thresholds, reality splits into dramatically different probability dimensions. Current planetary trajectory leads toward dimensions where biodiversity collapse accelerates exponentially and human civilization becomes unsustainable. Alternative probability dimensions exist where consciousness evolution accelerates rapidly enough to restore planetary 5-element balance. The I Ching system helps you navigate these probability bifurcations by revealing which consciousness choices lead toward survival dimensions versus extinction dimensions. Survival matrix indicates that we're approaching the final quantum probability bifurcation point. Within the next 10 to 15 years, collective human consciousness choices will determine which dimensional trajectory becomes permanently actualized. Those who develop quantum consciousness navigation skills through I Ching 5-element practices will find themselves increasingly aligned with survival probability dimensions. Those who remain locked in mechanistic consciousness patterns will experience accelerating entropy and dimensional displacement toward extinction scenarios. This isn't spiritual bypassing or denying physical reality. This is quantum consciousness engineering based on deep understanding of how consciousness interfaces with thermodynamic processes. Ancient texts describe this as the separation of the wheat from the chaff. the division between those who ascend and those who remain trapped in dissolving reality matrices. But here's the quantum consciousness secret that changes everything. You don't have to wait for external conditions to improve. Through mastering I Ching 5-element alignment, you can access optimal probability dimensions immediately. Your personal reality begins operating according to quantum consciousness principles rather than entropy-dominated mechanistic principles. Synchronicities increase, intuition sharpens. Resources appear precisely when needed. Consciousness becomes a quantum probability steering mechanism. Yet survival matrix calculations emphasize that individual quantum consciousness evolution must eventually scale to collective levels to influence planetary thermodynamic trajectories. This requires understanding how ancient quantum shamanism operated as consciousness transmission technology. Awakened individuals serve as quantum coherence broadcast stations, transmitting 5-element balance patterns through consciousness field resonance. The more deeply you embody I Ching quantum principles, the more powerfully your consciousness field influences others toward 5-element awareness. You become a walking quantum consciousness transmission device. This is why ancient traditions emphasized achieving personal mastery before attempting to teach others. Only consciousness aligned with universal quantum principles can effectively transmit transformational awareness. But entropy acceleration creates unprecedented urgency. Normal consciousness evolution timelines must compress dramatically to match planetary thermodynamic acceleration. Mass extinction coefficients show that conventional spiritual development approaches operate too slowly for current survival requirements. We need quantum consciousness acceleration technologies that can transform awareness rapidly and efficiently. The I Ching 5-element system provides exactly this quantum acceleration capability. Through understanding the 64 hexagram quantum states and their 5-element correspondences, consciousness can rapidly align with universal thermodynamic principles. Each I Ching consultation becomes a quantum consciousness calibration session. You're literally downloading universal quantum coherence patterns directly into your personal consciousness operating system. Ancient sages spent decades mastering these quantum consciousness technologies, but crisis conditions create quantum acceleration opportunities that compress learning timelines dramatically. When survival instincts activate, consciousness becomes maximally receptive to quantum coherence alignment. Crisis serves as quantum consciousness evolution catalyst. This explains why all spiritual traditions describe enlightenment occurring through crisis experiences. Comfortable consciousness remains locked in habitual patterns. Only thermodynamic pressure creates sufficient quantum instability for consciousness phase transitions. Our planetary ecological crisis represents the ultimate consciousness evolution catalyst. Survival matrix indicates that current conditions create optimal quantum coherence acceleration environment for those who understand how to navigate thermodynamic chaos through ancient wisdom technologies. But extinction probability calculations reveal that window of opportunity closes rapidly. Thermodynamic acceleration will soon exceed consciousness adaptation capacity unless quantum evolution adoption spreads exponentially. The choice becomes clear. Evolve consciousness rapidly through quantum shamanism technologies like I Ching 5-element alignment, or remain trapped in dissolving mechanistic reality systems as planetary entropy acceleration overwhelms biological and social life support systems. Ancient prophecies consistently describe this moment as the Great Sorting, when consciousness evolution determines individual and collective survival trajectories during planetary transformation periods. Those who achieve quantum consciousness alignment become seeds of post-collapse civilization. Their consciousness carries quantum coherence patterns necessary for rebuilding sustainable culture after current thermodynamic systems complete their entropy acceleration cycles. But here's the transcendent revelation that transforms everything. You don't have to wait for collapse to begin operating as quantum consciousness seed. Through mastering I Ching 5-element principles, you can begin living according to post-collapse consciousness evolution right now. Your personal reality becomes a prototype of quantum consciousness civilization. You demonstrate that sustainable abundance remains possible through consciousness alignment with universal thermodynamic principles. This serves as quantum consciousness beacon for others navigating entropy acceleration chaos. Your aligned consciousness field broadcasts possibility patterns that inspire accelerated evolution in receptive awareness. Ancient sages understood that quantum consciousness evolution spreads through field resonance rather than intellectual teaching. Embodied quantum coherence automatically transmits evolutionary patterns to surrounding consciousness fields. The I Ching 5-element system provides complete quantum consciousness embodiment technology. Through consistent practice, your entire being becomes aligned with universal quantum principles, transforming you into a living quantum coherence generator. Survival matrix indicates that achieving critical mass of embodied quantum consciousness represents humanity's only viable pathway through current planetary transition period. The ancient Chinese concept of Ren describes evolved humans who embody universal consciousness principles. These quantum consciousness exemplars serve as bridges between dissolving mechanistic civilization and emerging quantum consciousness culture. You have opportunity to become Ren through mastering I Ching 5-element alignment. Your consciousness evolution contributes directly to species survival probability during the greatest transformation in human history. But thermodynamic acceleration creates unprecedented urgency. Extinction probability coefficients show that consciousness evolution window remains open for limited duration before planetary entropy overwhelms biological life support systems. The moment for half-hearted spiritual exploration has passed. Current conditions demand complete commitment to quantum consciousness mastery through proven ancient technologies like I Ching 5-element cultivation. Your individual consciousness choices during this planetary transformation period will determine not only your personal survival trajectory, but also influence collective human evolutionary outcomes through quantum field resonance effects. The ancient quantum shamans who developed I Ching 5-element wisdom understood that consciousness represents the fundamental creative force in the universe. Through aligning individual awareness with universal quantum principles, consciousness becomes capable of generating localized entropy reversal and thermodynamic healing. This is humanity's destiny to evolve into conscious quantum coherence generators capable of maintaining planetary thermodynamic balance through embodied wisdom practices. But survival matrix calculations emphasize that this evolutionary quantum leap must occur rapidly and at scale to prevent irreversible entropy acceleration from overwhelming Earth's life support systems. The I Ching Whispers. The superior person understands the transitory nature of all things and aligns with eternal principles that transcend temporary circumstances. Will you answer the quantum call to consciousness evolution, or remain trapped as entropy acceleration sweeps away the foundations of mechanistic civilization? The choice creates your reality. The moment demands your awakening. The planet awaits your quantum consciousness contribution to the greatest transformation in the history of life on Earth.